Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to smoke a prime rib on the Oklahoma Joe smoker and then reverse sear it on the grill. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to know how to get edge to edge perfection with your prime rib. But before we go any further, if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel out a lot, and I really do appreciate it. Now, I started this process at Thanksgiving. I bought this piece of meat right after Thanksgiving, and I dry aged it myself. Here you see the part that I cut off. So I probably cut a good pound of it off just after it dry aged, and it started out at 10 pounds. By the time it dry aged and then I cut the outside of it off, we probably ended up with about 8 pounds worth of prime cut prime rib here. This is boneless. It doesn't have bone in, but it doesn't really matter. That doesn't affect the flavor that much. People think it does, but it really doesn't. Those bones are nice sometimes. They're good for presentation if you want to French cut them, or whatever. Maybe you like beef ribs, and that's good too. A lot of people use them to make their au jus, but they don't really add to the flavor. The flavor all basically comes from the marbling in the meat, the fat that's inside the meat, what you see here. And this, like I said, is a prime cut, so it's got plenty of marbling, plenty of good fat throughout the meat. What I'm using here is a butter and herb rub that I've created with just some thyme, rosemary, garlic, and butter, salt, pepper. I'll put the recipe in the description, but it's not difficult to do. You do want to make sure that you cover the entire piece of meat with the rub that you're putting on. So if you do have a bone-in variety, cut those bones away. Go ahead and season the entire piece of meat and then tie them back on. Now we're going to put it on the smoker at about 225 degrees, and I'm going to throw a couple of probes in it because it's a big prime rib. So I'm going to put one in each side, and we're going to bring this up to about 120 degrees before we take it off and reverse sear it. Maybe 115, probably about 115, and then I'll take it off and reverse sear it, and then we'll take it off there and let it rest. We want it to end up at approximately 130 degrees at the max, maybe 135 at the max. So the way I'm going to put these probes in here, I want to get to the center, and I'm going to put one in pretty far from this side. Actually, I'm going to put it in probably to about there, and because this is the bigger side. So this one I'm going to put in not as far, because I want it, this side is a little bit less thick. So we'll go to about there with that one. And this one, actually, I'm going to put in here and get it to about the middle of the meat here. So we're going to go right about there. There we go. Now we're just going to close her up. Let her rip for a few hours. I want to thank the manufacturer of this iProbe meat thermometer for sending this to me to check out. And this is what we're using today to keep track of the internal temperature of the actual prime rib that we're cooking. As you can tell, we have our target temperature set at 120. I'm actually probably going to pull it off here at 115 though. And as you can see, that internal temperature is already at about 48 degrees, which is just about perfect. I mean, you want to get it up to as close to room temperature as you can. Obviously, it's not room temperature, but it's fair. We started with meat that just came right out of the refrigerator, and I rested it for about 2.5 hours before I put it, on the smoker. So the temperature's at least going to be a lot more even when the meat cooks, and that's what you're after. That's why you do that. You rest it. I recommend 2.5 hours with one that big. I probably could have rested it for 3, but it's going to give us a much more even cook in the end. So I already have my 2 probes in the prime rib, but I'm going to put a third in there, and I'm going to use this meter. And this is my go-to wireless probe that I use quite often. The other one is a new one that I'm trying out, and it's doing well so far. But the one thing that it doesn't do that this one does is that other probe, the new one, measures the internal temperature of the meat, and it'll tell me when it gets up to temperature, but it won't tell me the ambient temperature of the grill. And I want to know the ambient temperature inside the smoker So I'm going to go ahead and put this in there just as a way for me to monitor the ambient temperature in the smoker itself. And of course, the Oklahoma Joe's drum smoker has a thermometer on it that is pretty accurate, but I don't like to rely on that. I like to have at least one way to double check that. So that meter gives me a good way to keep sure that I'm not going over temp on my smokes. Now this meat has gotten up to about 115 and it's time to take it and put it on the grill. So what I've done here is I went ahead and preheated the grill for about 30 minutes or so before I ever took it off the smoker. And the reason I did that is because I wanted those grates to be super hot. I mean, as hot as they could possibly be. I actually preheated it with the lid down, and I've just opened it here so that I can get it onto the grill. All I'm trying to do here is get the outer crust on the meat. It is already basically cooked. When I took it off at 115, I could have rested it then, and it would end up at about 125. So when I take it off, it's still going to cook in its rest for probably another 10 degrees or so. The reason I took it off at 115 and not 120 is because I'm reverse searing it. So all I'm going to do is leave it on here and just roll it around and keep managing it until the entire thing has a good enough crust on it to my liking. And then I'm going to take it off and I'm going to tint it with some foil. Now this is probably a good time to tell you, if you're doing this and you don't have a pair of these heat resistant gloves, get you a pair of these. This is what they look like. I'll link them in the description. Full disclosure, I earn a little something for the effort. If you are kind enough to use the links, don't feel obligated. I just put them there so you can find the stuff easily. I'm going to put both probes there too. All right, these came in real handy. Just put the nitrile gloves right over the top. Works great. Brought it in, rested it. It's been smoked, reverse seared. We got the temperature. It's still resting a little bit, but we're at 127. And that'll probably stop around 130. But even if it doesn't go up another degree, that's perfectly fine with me because I like my meat rare to medium rare. So that's really anywhere between 120 and 130-ish. Ends are closer to 130, 135 because they're a little bit smaller. And so for people that like medium rare versus rare, they're going to be pleased because as you cut this, you'll have anywhere from medium rare to rare throughout. Of the prime rib here is 127. That's where it ended up. And that's fine because we'll test it everywhere else and we're going to come up with some different temperatures. Probably what we'll come up with is anywhere from the 125 mark to possibly 130. This is 126, 127. That was actually 129. On this smaller end, I'm expecting we'll see somewhere in the neighborhood of 130-ish. Looks like we got 129 there. Looks like we're actually about 127 there too. Pretty consistent actually throughout. 125. We should have a pretty rare, but not too rare, but a pretty rare prime rib there. So I'll love it for sure. And as you can see, by throwing that on the grill in the end, we've got a great crust on the outside. And by smoking it, we have edge-to-edge pink on the inside, very consistent throughout. Now, I've cooked prime rib every way you can imagine, and this was by far the best prime rib I've ever cooked in my life. All right. As far as I'm concerned, that is prime rib perfection. And of course, I made the sides and the sauces. Here's my 4 hots of the horsepocalypse sauce, along with the potatoes you see there, the au jus, the green beans. And it turned out to be a great Christmas meal. It was all delicious. And if you want any of those other recipes, like the 4 hots of the horsepocalypse sauce, or the au jus, or the potato casserole that I made there, just let me know in the comments, and I'll hit you up with the recipe as soon as I can. You know what I'm going to tell you now? The most important ingredient you can ever put in any recipe is, of course, love. Thanks for watching.